If we could have forgotten that St. Helena owed its existence to a volcano, underground fires took it upon themselves to remind us of that fact. One evening, we were surprised by an earthquake. It was 10 p.m. Everyone was in bed or had gone to his quarters. The emperor was in his bed. I was reading him a song from the Charlemagne poem, published by Prince Lucian, when suddenly violent shaking made me jump out of my chair and lifted the emperor in his bed. "What is that?" he said to me. "An earthquake? Or has the conqueror blown up?" I immediately went out to seek information. I found everyone at their doors saying it was an earthquake. I came back to tell the emperor, who had not left his bed, the duration of this earthquake was between 15 and 20 seconds. That was all we needed, an earthquake to make our stay on St. Helena more enjoyable. The shaking had been vertical. We learned the next day that the ships in the harbor had also felt it, and later by the ships arriving from the Cape that had been felt in that city. Cipriani and those who lodged above the emperor told me they had been frightened by the noise from the roof and the partitions. Count Bertrand's and Count de Montsalon's children were awakened by it. The emperor spoke one day of his admiration for the marvelous Nile River that, thanks to its overflowing each year, brings a necessary fertilizer to that beautiful country. He told Dr. O'Meara, who had been to Egypt, that he was going to the pyramids with the expedition scientists. He came across a caravan that had just been ransacked. The leader of the caravan came to see him and introduced his two daughters, covered with veils from head to foot. They implored my protection, he said, and seized my hands, which they kissed and found very attractive. This was during a halt, and my tent was set up. They went inside. I had them served sherbet, and I gave orders that searches be made at once in the tribes where the thefts had occurred. I had, continued the emperor, made the heads of the tribe responsible for the extortion and assassinations that took place in each of them. They hurried to return the stolen objects. The caravan resumed its way, and after expressing its gratitude to me, once in Cairo, they proclaimed the Sultan Kabir was a protector of the true believers. The rumor went around that I was a friend of the Prophet and that the French were not infidels. The doctor reminded him of the Cairo revolt and the vigor with which it had been repressed. "Yes, without a doubt," said the emperor. "We had every reason to fear the fanatics. The feelings of several of the sheiks were not favorable to us, among them those of Sheikh Sada. This old fanatic, broken by the years, and a descendant of the Prophet's family, was highly revered and marched at the head of the rebels. I nevertheless had him arrested and thrown in jail, and with him some 20 of the more mutinous, whom I had put in the citadel and beheaded. As I knew the love of the people for the old sheik, I had him come before me. He was expecting a legitimate punishment. He threw himself on his knees when he came in and admitted he was guilty. I kindly had him get up, spared his life, and requested his friendship. Kleber walked in at that instant and asked me when we were alone who that man was. He had just seen kneeling before me. "He was the leader of the rebellion," I said to him. "What? And you did not have him hanged?" "No, I prefer to leave to the people this old man who can't mount a horse anymore, and cut off the heads of those who, more fit for execution, are full of audacity." Once the rebellion had been put down, the sheiks came in great ceremony to ask pardon for the culprits. I had Sheikh Sada brought in and handed him over to them. As they seemed to expect that the others would come also, I told them the heavens had ordered that they be executed. They fell to their knees and said to me they deserved it, they were truly guilty. My clemency towards this old sheik showed in their eyes my respect for the Prophet's blood and earned me friends among them. Had Kleber acted in the same way, the emperor continued, he would not have been assassinated, having learned that this same sheik did not wish to make the payoff. Instead of seeing in him an old flag they waved and seizing his advisors, he had him thrown in prison and mistreated. The people and the higher-ups were infuriated by that, and holy war was declared against him. The priests were informed of his assassin's plan by written notes he would leave each day at the mosque. Each of them even asked if holy war against an infidel could please God. Receiving an affirmative answer from the priest, the assassin proceeded to carry out the crime he had been on the point of renouncing because of the difficulty of the endeavor. When he reached Kleber, he presented him with a petition and took advantage of the moment when he was reading it to strike him down. He ran away and was found not far from there, praying, his face turned towards the east. That death meant the loss of Egypt, which Kleber's cleverness would certainly have kept for us. We were approaching the end of 1817. A sort of status quo prevailed in the news when a ship arriving from Europe brought newspapers and letters that were sent to Longwood. The emperor learned, with some dissatisfaction, that Santini had been arrested in Vienna, and a town in Germany had been assigned him as a prison. He had already blamed this pamphlet. He also blamed a move that, although made with good intentions, could lead people to believe he had been asked to do it. This ill temper increased as a result of reports Dr. O'Meara gave to the governor, which the doctor had not told him of. He was called General Bonaparte in them. The emperor demanded the doctor's word of honor that he would not give any further health bulletins without his permission, or he would no longer receive him. These annoyances occurred at a time when the emperor was ill. He complained about his side and about his legs being swollen. I would have lived to the age of 80, he said to the doctor, if the poor treatment I endured here and the abominable climate where I have been placed were not killing me sooner. The matter of the Boltons was about to renew the bitterness in relations between Longwood and Plantation House. However, Sir Hudson Lowe informed the Grand Marshal that he was removing the prohibition on entering the house in the valley and talking to people the emperor and his officers might meet along their way. The emperor had some hope that things would be returned to the way they were under Admiral Cockburn, and had him reply these last measures would change nothing to his resolve not to go out on horseback until matters had been restored to the state they were in on the governor's arrival. Count Casas, having returned from the Cape, was in the St. Helena harbor and wrote to Count Bertrand to inform him of his return to Europe. He told him he had unloaded 2 small kegs of wine from Constance for the emperor, one red and one white, and conveyed his respects to the emperor and his regards to his companions in exile. The emperor called this Constance wine the Las Casas wine. Countess Bertrand has said to the emperor on presenting her son to him, "Here's a Frenchman who entered Longwood without the governor's permission." Countess de Montsalon, who had just given birth to a daughter, could use the same words when she presented her to him. It was her second child, since she had arrived in St. Helena. The emperor was the godfather, as he had been for the first one. The aftermath of that pregnancy was not as fortunate as the first, but gave no hint that a year later a return to Europe was the only thing that would restore Countess de Montsalon's health. Princess Borghese had learned that the wine given to the emperor was no good and had done him harm. She hurried to send a large number of cases of wine through the intermediary of Lady Holland so that they could reach St. Helena. She renewed the request she had previously made to come to share and ease the emperor's captivity. He was touched by his sister's sustained devotion, but still refused, no matter how great his affection for the princess. Lady Holland added to this shipment some boxes of delicacies, which she begged the emperor to accept. One day, Dr. O'Meara was visiting the emperor and telling him about the difficulties the governor was causing him over the bulletins and his stern refusal to accept them with any other title than that of General Bonaparte. "I do not want this," the emperor said, "because these bulletins go to the commissioners, and I do not want people to think I agree with this qualification. If I must lose you, I will lose you. But I shall never be forced to receive another doctor that is not of my own choosing. They insist on wanting to give me Baxter, and I do not want him." As soon as the emperor continued to speak, he suddenly saw the doctor collapse, fortunately in an armchair that happened to be behind him. The emperor called out in a loud voice. I was writing in the adjoining room, entered quickly, and found him busy undoing the doctor's necktie, which seemed to be bothering him. I grabbed a bottle of cologne and poured a large quantity of it on a handkerchief which the emperor applied to his temples, while I put a bottle of smelling salts under his nose. As he regained his senses, he said to the emperor he had been bled that morning, which had brought about the loss of consciousness. "I feared," said the emperor, "that it was a stroke. Your face became that of a dead man. I thought your soul had left you." As he was retiring, the emperor motioned to me to accompany him. Months went by without bringing any change in the emperor's situation. The year 1818 was filled with events, each more sad than the last. One could not avoid noticing that the emperor's health was deteriorating visibly, and that only great moral strength allowed him to bear the difficulties of his captivity. Dr. O'Meara's refusal to comply with Sir Hudson Lowe's orders regarding the bulletins earned him an order not to go outside the Longwood compound. They claimed his visits in town and on board the ships of the squadron had no other purpose than to arrange intelligence measures to convey to England infamous lies against the governor. Sir Hudson Lowe wanted to force him to give him a full accounting of his conversations with General Bonaparte, and when the doctor reported to him what people thought of him at Longwood, he would go into violent rages. Dr. O'Meara himself insisted that the emperor see Dr. Baxter, who, he said, was a man of great talent and faultless character. "I believe all the good you say about him," replied the emperor, "but Mr. Lowe wants to impose him on me, and for the sole reason that he is his friend, I shall never agree to have him near me. I could have accepted a doctor from Admiral Cockburn, who did not inspire distrust in me, but I am too ill inclined towards Mr. Lowe to accept one coming from him." It was in the midst of all these annoyances that news of Princess Charlotte's death reached Longwood. The emperor was saddened by this event, as the princess had criticized his captivity on St. Helena. It could be hoped that once again she gained the throne, she would change or ameliorate the emperor's situation. The Russian and Austrian commissioners whom these gentlemen met at times conveyed fine words from their courts, but nothing in them constituted in order for them to brave the governor's ill will and be presented at Longwood as they seemed to wish to be. The emperor therefore remained at the mercy of the British government, and they remained powerless spectators to the application of the vexatious and monstrous restrictions dictated by Lord Bathurst. To these concerns was added the departure of General Gourgaud, whose continuous relapses weakened his health. The emperor had complained more than once about his irritable nature, and after having endured these continuous annoyances, he got angry. He advised him to request his return to Europe because he did not wish him to fight any longer against the destructive climate. The governor hastened to approve his request. On January 13th, the general left Longwood to go to Plantation House, accompanied by an engineering officer, Mr. Jackson. He was quartered at Bale Cottage with the same officer who did not leave him until they set out to sea. He waited a month for a vessel from the East India Company to take him directly to Europe without going by way of the Cape. His physical and mental suffering must have been awful during this long month. Having been unable to communicate with Longwood, the emperor did not forget his devotion, nor the brilliant qualities of this former ADC, whom he knew to be most attached to him. And he would have liked for Generals Montholon and Gourgaud to live as brothers. Since he could not have this, he had to regain his disturbed tranquility by sending away the man who thwarted this desire. Their inability to get along was not based on motives of ambition, but on an equal share in the emperor's affection, which the general quite wrongly believed he did not have. General Gourgaud's work was going to be added to that of General Montholon. The Grand Marshal, farther away from the main house, would naturally be called on less often to attend to the emperor. However, the emperor, not wishing the distractions provided by work to become tiresome, made greater use of me, either for reading during the day, whether he was in his bath or not, or having me write under his dictation very often, so as to not disturb Count Montholon. At night, he had Novaraz or Saint-Denis call me. He tried to use Saint-Denis, but he could not keep up with the emperor. He remained in charge of straightening out his dictation, a task he performed very well, as he had beautiful handwriting. Furthermore, if the emperor wanted to have a manuscript sent to Europe, it was thus easier for it to escape the investigation of the governor and his agents. His sad departure was followed 2 weeks later by a death, as painful as it was regrettable for everyone in the colony. Cipriani had just died, struck down, dead in 2 days' time. He died of awful intestinal pains. They came on him very suddenly. The emperor truly missed him and told me he would have accompanied him to his final resting place had it been inside the compound. A large number of island notables and garrison officers joined the entire French colony, who followed him to the cemetery at Plantation House. I alone remained with the emperor during that sad day. General Gourgaud, who had not yet left the island, asked to join the cortege, but permission was denied him. I had known Cipriani very well on Elba. He then had a charming young wife and 2 children he had brought with him. I shared his happiness and his sorrows, and our friendship from the island of Elba had only deepened on St. Helena. Cipriani was a Corsican, and he had almost been brought up in the emperor's household. He felt there was a mystery surrounding the death of his mother, whom he said had been found strangled in her bed. As a young man, he found a protector in Mr. Salicetti, who was then in Italy. He became superintendent of his household and, because of his rare intelligence, was given delicate missions which he successfully carried out. He was soon involved in secret police matters and would have reached a high position but for the death of his protector. Having acquired a good deal of money, he entered the shipping business and went to sea. The year 1815 found him in this situation when he entered the emperor's service on the island of Elba as butler. Cipriani was deeply attached to the emperor. His character was strong, his heart kind, and his soul sensitive. He died of an inflammation of the lower abdomen with the most alarming symptoms. It quickly became critical. The emperor was quite worried, sending me constantly for news of him. On the first day, he was still able to speak to me of his wife and children, whom he entrusted to the emperor. During the night of the 25th to the 26th, the emperor summoned Dr. O'Meara and asked if his presence would be good for Cipriani. The doctor advised him against it, saying he was still conscious enough that his love and veneration for him might bring about an emotion that would hasten his death. The following day, Cipriani was no longer. He was a self-made man, had seen and retained much, and this made his conversation most interesting and lively. He was a reliable man. His feelings were Republican, and he greatly admired the Girondists, of whom he had known several, and who had become his friends. May he be honored here by the memory I keep of him. The emperor asked me to prepare an inventory of Cipriani's belongings and papers. He told me to give these to the Grand Marshal, who was to send Madame Cipriani the emperor's regrets on her husband's death and a pension as proof of satisfaction for his good services. Cipriani had been taken to the cemetery by a Protestant priest. On this occasion, and in connection with the christening of the children of Countesses Bertrand and Montholon, who had been born in Longwood, the emperor regretted there was no priest in the establishment to attend Cipriani during his last moments and take him to his final resting place. Preoccupied by this thought, he later had Count Bertrand write to Cardinal Fesch, asking him to send a French or an Italian priest, learned, with whom he would be able to converse. This death had caused us all great sadness. A month after that, another death occurred, touching us much less, but demonstrated with what speed one could be stricken by such inflammations of the lower abdomen. It was death of a maid-servant Countess de Montholon for her daughter, Mademoiselle Napoleon. Like Cipriani, she was gone within a few days. That woman was British. Everyone was surprised that, being in perfect health, the young woman was taken by death so quickly. Since he had been at Bale College, General Gourgaud had not been left for 1 minute by Lieutenant Jackson. Only the commissioners had been able to see him and offer him some company during the long month he had been away from Longwood. Before leaving, he expressed the wish to talk to the Grand Marshal, but the latter said he would refuse if the presence of a British officer were insisted upon. The governor, in turn, stood firm in those conditions. He nevertheless allowed Dr. O'Meara to see the general before he left, but as this was in the presence of Mr. Jackson, who did not leave them alone 1 moment, he could not pass on anything about his conversations with the commissioners and the governor himself that could have been of interest to the emperor. He left on March 15th, 1817, taking with him a draft for 500 louis, 20,000 francs, and the Grand Marshal had given that to him.